Kristen.
Good evening,
Good evening.
Kevin.
That was very serious.
I'm trying to get a little more serious
Serious stuff today.
because I've been listening to my voice.
Your voice. Is that the little voice you hear in your head?
No, because the voice in my head, which we were talking about, how we hear our voice, is buffered by our bone and
our
muscles.
So what we hear when we talk is not what everybody else hears.
Right. So what we hear in our head is a little bit lower, and it sounds really nice to us, our voice. And of course, we're used to it because that's what we've heard. But then when we hear recordings, we're like, oh, I don't want to hear my voice recorded. And I sound a little bit like the nanny. I have a very annoying voice in real life.
I would not disagree with that sometimes. And I think it's like that nasally, and if you whine or something, like I never watched that show, but I remember like flipping and it would be there.
Either. She was annoying.
But she had that like annoying, and if she like whined, yeah, it was really annoying. So
I think I'm very annoying, so I'm not really sure why I'm on a podcast.
I don't know, but I will say this too.
I mean, I do. It's because my husband forced no.
Wow, I forced you. Nice. I will say this though, I agree. Like when I hear my voice through these headphones, or if I go back and listen to something recorded, it is not. I'm like, wow, that's just not how that sounded to me.
So hold on. How does your voice sound to you?
Higher.
Your voice sounds higher because like what we were listening to said traditionally when everything in your head buffers your voice to your ears, it's supposed to sound a little bit lower.
Oh, wait a minute. Time out. I thought you were saying, what does it sound like in my ears right now? Yes, it's higher right now, but when I hear it myself,
I'm sorry.
Just hear it when I'm speaking.
We were saying the opposite. Okay, right. Yeah. So to you in your head, it's lower.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I was thinking you were saying to you in your head, it's higher. No. Yeah.
No. So that was a tangent that you started us with here. That was really good. Anyway, I'm Kevin.
I thought we did this already. I'm Kristen, the one that sounds nasally.
And this is the Marriage in the Buff podcast.
Yep.
Where we talk about everything marriage.
And other stuff, clearly.
And any crazy tangents we would like. And how that applies in practical ways today. Because we base everything we talk about, hopefully, on God's word and his plan for marriages.
Absolutely.
But that's pretty much the antithesis of what the world does.
Right. And the cool thing that I think that we're trying to accomplish through this is to have other people on to be able to share their stories, ways that they have overcome issues, hardships, problems in marriage by doing things God's way, by looking to God and finding the answers there, and hopefully giving some encouragement to people who are maybe going through the same thing or something similar, just love to have some, faith-building stories. I don't even think you need to be going through the same thing, although it's so nice to hear that, but I don't even think to have an engaging story.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing that in marriage, in life, no matter what it is, with our sins, with our thoughts and everything, the devil wants to isolate us and wants us to believe that we are the only ones that have ever had to, or we're the only one that's ever made this mistake, or you are the only one going through this right now, or whatever it may be. And that's just not true. You know, we were meant to do life together. And part of that doing life together is learning from one another and sharing our stories with other people so that you know that you are not just out there on an island alone and you screwed up so bad that nobody's going to want to be around you. Your spouse is never going to want to talk to you. You're too broken or whatever it is. We all screw up.
Yeah. So that leads me to an interesting question. So do you think that there is ever a point, let's say in marriage, or I mean, even in life, but that someone is too broken to be able to come back? Because I think that there are people who feel that that's true. Do you feel that way?
No, not at all.
Now, you're going through a little coughing attack here.
Dying over here.
It's because You're not drinking your root beer.
Is that it? It's because I'm drinking water, which I drink 95% of the time.
So
it's now that I can talk again, it's funny that we were talking to some people this week, and the conversation was talking about marriages and
which a lot of our dialogues seem to be around.
Especially with other people. I mean, us too. Like, we talk about it when we're not talking to other people too. But we were talking to a couple, and we're talking about like marriages and marriage counseling and stuff like that. And one of the people said something that just hit me wrong. And it was that in a case of infidelity, in most cases, it's over and done. There's nothing you can do. And the reason that hit me wrong,
I think they said almost always there's no coming back from
that. And the reason that hit me wrong is that literally is what the world tells you. Number one, that's it. It's like, oh, that's it. Go find someone else, move on for yourself. You screwed up too much. You're broken. This is ruined, or they're not going to want you or anything. And when we do that as Christians, the biggest problem is we're putting God into a box.
Right.
We're not only putting God into a box and saying, okay, I know better than you, God. The really, really dangerous part of it is we put God in a box and put ourselves as judging God's institution of marriage and saying, you know what, God, you cannot do this. I know you can't. You can't do it, God. You're not great enough. You're not good enough or anything else. And there is nothing God can't do. So when we just kind of take that checkout answer of, wow, too broken, you screwed up too bad, it's over, we're putting God in a box, and not just putting him on a box, we're pushing him back on a shelf somewhere.
Can I take that a step further and say that we're not just saying what he can or can't do or what we feel will happen, but we're actually limiting his redemptive powers.
Yeah.
Because by saying that is, even if we say almost impossible to recover from, we are, oh no, Juju, what happened?
I hit her with my foot accidentally, of course.
I'm going to have to pick her up. But we are literally doubting his redemptive powers. And that is a scary place to be.
Absolutely.
Right?
And I think that's one thing we do as Christians, as people in general, that we judge people. We judge situations. We judge motives.
Yeah.
And the Bible tells us not to judge because the level we judge, we will be judged. So that's pretty simple.
Feel like we don't know. How are we going to be able to know every situation around?
Exactly, because we can't see.
Right. We're not omniscient and like God is.
But the other part of that is, like I said, the problem that bothered me the most, the problem with the whole thing, because I've been thinking about it, the problem that bothers me the most in the whole thing is I'm not just judging those people. I am judging what God can or cannot do.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Who am I? Who are we to judge what God can or cannot do? Now, there are points that absolutely, like, people will walk away. Is it fixable? Not right here, right now. But with God, anything is possible. And I think when we just, it's not the fact that some things broken beyond what we need, we know, we can see, and everything else. Absolutely. But
God,
we are not the one who judges that. We are not the one who makes that decision. And when we, especially if we are helping people, if we feel like God's calling us to speak to people and speak into people and talk to people and everything else, if I'm putting limits on what God's going to do, I'm not doing God's will for me either.
Right. And I was going to say something just like that when you were talking. I was thinking, I'm also limiting God working through me.
Yes.
Because if I already have that viewpoint of, God, these people are past help, I see no way of redemption.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this is an answer. Maybe this is a case where divorce is is permissible. Maybe, this is my finite mind, and I'm not allowing God to work through me if he wills to do that.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge part that we try to put everything into something we can understand. And I think that's a huge disservice to us. We search for the answers. If someone gets sick, why? What happened? You have cancer. What happened? What did I do? Well, it could just be your genetics. It could be an unfortunate situation that you had absolutely no control over, which in most cases it is. But we always search for that why. If something happens to our child, if God forbid one of our children gets hurt or dies or something like that, the question is why? When bad things happen, when planes crash, the thing why? It's always why. And we worry so much of the why that we forget the who. And when we do that, it's dangerous, because why we can only understand. Why means somebody has to explain it, put it into perspective, put it into a box that our finite minds can understand. But God works outside of all of that. And we just need to look to the who. It's like, man, your marriage is really bad. My marriage is really bad. I just feel like it's over. There's nothing I can do. You can't, but God can. I mean, we have sat in that situation ourselves.
Absolutely.
Where both of us, like when we're just sitting there looking at it, we are broken and we feel we failed.
Beyond hope.
We feel the other person has failed. Mm-hmm. And we are ready to give up.
And when we are in that position, we are playing God.
Exactly.
We are playing God by judging our spouses.
Yeah. And it is. And I don't think it's even judging. It is judging our spouses. Don't get me wrong with that. But we're judging ourselves. Like we sit there and we think, wow,
I'm beyond.
This wasn't supposed to be.
Right.
This wasn't the way it was supposed to be. To who? We don't know God's plans. We know they're good and they're for us to prosper and everything else. But God sees outside those lines and we don't know what that means.
And it's funny you're saying that, because I have always been of the mindset, like, it is hard for me, and I know it's done always, and I know it's probably more often done than not, what you were just saying of why. It is very hard for me to ask the question why, because I feel, who am I to try and understand God's will? Who am I? Like, I feel very small compared to God. Mm-hmm. So it's almost ridiculous for me to ask the question why. So maybe those big unknowns are easier for me to grasp because I've let go trying to understand the reason why. So when someone says why, it's almost like, that's a stupid question. But trust me, I'm not saying that someone's stupid for asking that, because I know the majority of times people ask why. Mm-hmm. But then let me go one step further. I hear people literally explaining it. Well, God probably has this, and this for you, and he wants you to, how do you have no idea how? Like, I almost think that that's even crazier. So I'm listening to two very well-meaning people asking why, and their hurt and their pain, which I get it. But it's also crazy to ask that question to me. And then someone answering that question like they know. Like, how are we supposed to know?
Yeah, and I think that's it. Unfortunately, when someone asks the why, we feel obliged to give an answer, or even obligated to give the answer, which is dangerous as well.
Right.
There are some things that, why does a child get cancer? I have no idea.
And it's beyond my mind to comprehend, because...
And that's it. It is beyond our mind to comprehend. Now, on the other side of that, I have seen marriages that were broken. I have seen marriages that you would have said, no way, they're going to get a divorce. They will never, ever. There is no hope, no anything. But God did. And he gave them the hope, and he changed things, and he turned around.
He turned them around.
Yeah, he turned them around. And I think, that's a huge part. We talk about it a lot. I can't fix her.
No.
And she can't fix me. When we work on fixing ourselves, this works. We got to get this, the vertical marriage. You've never read the book. It's called Vertical Marriage. Till you fix this will never be right.
Yeah. And I just think that coming back to, if you are in a situation that you feel is hopeless, you're at the end of it, there is always hope if you're still breathing.
Yeah. If you're still breathing,
and
he's not done with you.
If you are willing to surrender it all to God.
Yes.
So for someone to say, well, you're basically over. There's really not much chance of coming back from that. Run if someone's going to tell you that, or run if you really feel like that's what you're getting from anyone in that scenario, even your spouse, because you can have enough faith and you can wait long enough and God can restore. He can restore anything. And I pulled up some verses that just completely build my faith on what God can do. Mm-hmm. But Jesus looked at them and said, with man, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible.
And I think that's good because that has to be that's the switch. When we go from why to who. Why is this happening? I don't know. Who can fix it? He can.
Yeah.
So, when we turn our gaze upon him instead of worrying about how am I going to get her to change? How am I going to get out of this situation? How am I going to, pay this bill? How am I going to help my kid? How am I going to move on? How am I going to find a job? How am I going to, whatever it is.
Fill in the blank.
When we take control of all that, that's not what we're supposed to do. That's the world. We're supposed to ask God, who gives all to those who ask. And he wants to help us and he wants to show us. He may not answer the why, but he'll certainly answer the how.
Mm-hmm. So that was, Matthew 19:26. Then you have Luke 1:37, for nothing will be impossible with God. I mean, the Bible literally tells us this, tells us who to turn to and the steps, like you said, the how, right? Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Not my own strength.
No.
Because yes, that is impossible. But God is in you. If you surrender your entire everything to him, he will fill you with his power. But you have to believe it. And I think that that's why some things just don't happen, because there are people who say things, well, that's impossible, or, well, that's not going to happen, or, they definitely limit. And they have that strength of a resurrection inside them, which pretty much blows my mind. Genesis 18:14, is anything too hard for the Lord?
No.
John 1:3, all things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made.
Yes.
And
I
love, just one more, because I wanted to find this one. I think this one really, it's a straight, I don't usually pull Old Testament verses out, but when I was reading this, Exodus 14:14, the Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent.
Yeah, and that's good. I mean, that's so hard.
But that's the rest in the Lord. That's let him pick up the fight for you.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about us a little bit. So we've been married 25 years. And when we got married, I was not a good person.
You didn't know God, though.
No, had no clue. And I did.
When you don't know God, you're not the same person you are today. So let's also remember that when people have habitual sin in their life, something that they do over and over and over, they're not walking with God. They're not turning to God.
Absolutely.
So those are two very different situations.
Yeah, no, but so I wasn't. I never thought I'd live past 30, and I would say I lived that life to make that happen. But by God's grace, even when I was so far from Him, He protected me and guided me and brought you to me and everything. Fast forward, I found God. And I was going to school full-time at Liberty for a degree in theology, like really walking the walk. And we had a church plant here in Buffalo, and we were leading people and all that stuff. And, I could see God moving. I could see things happening, and it was good. And it wasn't good enough. And when that season ended, when we ended the elevation extension here in Buffalo, I was hurt. I was hurt by God. And I'm going to tell you, the question was why. That was the biggest one. Like, I feel, oh man, I was called to this. I was whatever. Why? And it was both ways. It's like, God, why? But it's like, then you second guess everything you did. Why did I do this? Why did I do that? Why did this work like this? Why didn't this happen? Why wasn't it this number? Why wasn't it? And there's so many whys in that season. And in that season of whys, I definitely fell away. I definitely was angry with God. And I'm just like, God, you know what? This whole thing, I got it. I can do better.
You can do, that's what
I can do it better on my own. In that season, you and I went along, and I know we talked about this not too long ago. We never talked about that. When that ended, I mean, there may have been an initial conversation, but we lost our family. We had these people on our core team that were there all the time.
Yeah.
For a year, like we had these people around us almost every day for a year. We did life together. We did everything. And it just ended. And it was hard. And you and I never really talked through that. So as time goes on, different seasons arise, and I am more back to Kevin and just doing whatever Kevin wanted to do. And you know what? Rather than take the time to look inside myself to see, hey, what's going on, I just used everything around me to block that out. So I would pursue this. It'd be a job. It'd be whatever it was. And I'd give all to that and was on to the next thing because it couldn't fill that hole. We all know there's a Jesus-sized hole in your heart that He's the only one who can fill. But in doing that, I made a lot of bad choices and just kept relying on me. And with you and I, we got to a point that we had a horrible situation with our daughter, health issues, hospitalization. It was COVID. Like that has to be the worst time I can remember was COVID, because it just put everybody together in their house. And you had two choices. You had a choice to look inward and upward, or you just hated being there and looking for any way to get out, anything to get your attention, anything to fill the time, and everything else. And with us, we grew apart. I mean, we were already on that path, but that was like the nail. And with everything our daughter went through, I'm like, wow, okay, this is great. I mean, not great, but when she came home, I'm like, wow. I mean, I just had this huge sigh of relief. I'm like,
exhale.
I mean, it was bad. And I'm just like, all right. And I talked to God a little bit in that time, just because of the gravity of what was going on and everything. And I remember less than 2 weeks later, you said, we got in a fight, and you told me you wanted a divorce. And I ignored it. Honestly, I'm just like, oh, she's just mad, whatever. That wasn't the first time you'd said something like that, you know? So I ignored it, and things were a little worse, but I don't think they were horrible. Like, there may have been a comment here, there, whatever. And that was in October, the end of October. And then I remember we went for our anniversary, we went to dinner. And on our way from dinner, you told me you were serious and you wanted a divorce. We'd make it through the holidays. And that was it. Mm-hmm. And even then, I mean, it was hard. But I still like, no. And in that time, from December 8th through maybe Christmas time, I still had that denial in my mind. I'm like, nah, she didn't mean that and everything. And then around there, it really did hit me. And that was the why. It was like, why, God? You know, I was broken. Mm-hmm. And I didn't understand, though I should have, because there had been so many warning signs and things along the way. And somewhere, I think it was in early January, that I just really gave it to God. And I said, God, I don't know. The one thing I thought, the thing that I thought I could always count on was you. And it was going. I couldn't control it. I couldn't manipulate it. I couldn't hold it. I couldn't force it. I couldn't do anything. And at that time, it turned me to him. Mm-hmm. And he drew me close. And he opened my eyes to see that I couldn't change you. I couldn't change the situation. Mm-hmm. The only thing I could change was me. And he started speaking to me and of the things that I needed to change and the things, like I looked at things I'd never looked at before. I thought about things I'd never thought about before. I saw things I'd never seen before. Between praying, reading the word, talking to people, and we're still in COVID. So it was different. You couldn't just go anywhere you wanted. There wasn't, right. We were coming out of COVID, so it still sucked. And, but in that time, as horrible as it was, that's the closest to God I've ever been.
Mm. Wow.
And that's when I went from the why mm-hmm. to the who, because I knew there's only one person mm-hmm. who could fix it. You know, fast forward, and even at that time, I remember telling you somewhere in that January time frame, and I get it. I'm sorry. I get it. And I'm working on me. And I don't know if those weren't words you wanted to hear, but I don't think those were words that you could trust, believe or anything else. So it was another 4 months-ish till May, sometime in May, that you and I, God had worked on us both.
Right.
God had worked on us both. And at that time, through the wilderness, through all that, through the, like literally, there was a time you're telling me, I don't want you here, get out. I want a divorce, like daily, multiple times daily. I remember it was awful. It would break my heart every time I heard those words. But like I said, that is when I understood that you have to give it all to him and realize that you can't do it, but he can.
Right.
And he works all things for good. Mm-hmm. He has all the answers. He sees things we can't see, and the best is yet to come. And so when I, just fast forward to today, through that, if it wasn't for that,
right.
Number one, we wouldn't be together. But if it wasn't for that, we would have never worked on our marriage.
No, probably.
So even if we were physically together, we wouldn't have been together. We wouldn't have been where we
I
are.
never really thought about that that you wouldn't have had a catalyst for a change.
No.
Okay.
But we really,
I think because over years, I've just always like, well, if this, he will, if this, he will. And for a little bit, and then it would go, you know what I mean? You'd be here and here. But I guess that's when you fully surrendered all.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's so
And then I
hard
fully
and important.
surrendered all. And I'm still walking through surrendering to, I mean, I don't know if we'll ever fully be like, God, take every single thing. You know what I mean?
I hear you. And what's the sign by your bed say?
Give it to God and go to sleep.
Yes. Because our mind is the most dangerous place to live in.
You do recognize that my worry is just night and day from what it used to be.
Oh, absolutely.
So I feel like I'm much better with that sign.
Absolutely. And I will say on that, like I said, that was a switch in our relationship. I mean, we had been married over 20 years.
Yeah. So you would
Nobody
think,
ever said there was that much
made
happiness. There wasn't that much happiness. I won't say there wasn't that much. There was not as much happiness as you would expect in 20 plus years together. We had our ups and downs, but we had a lot of real highs and a lot of really, really lows.
Yeah.
So, it was hard. Now, after that May, we started working on things. We started
working on things together.
Yeah.
Together.
Yeah, we were, it's funny because, we just did the vision retreat, but that really was, I think, when we had a glimpse of what God had for us, what his plan was for us.
Maybe you more than me. I didn't think I knew what a plan was together. Like, I feel that you have always had these, like, we're going to do a podcast. We're going to help others. And I'm more like, wait, we need to walk, learn, and be.
Mm-hmm. And I didn't have those back then. But,
okay. I thought
but
that's what you were saying.
No. I just meant like a plan for us.
Oh,
Like,
gotcha.
listen, if we're going to survive, we know God put us together for a reason. So we need to continually work on us. Yeah. We would read the Bible to each day, not sitting down together, but we'd read the same things. We'd talk about those things. We would listen to marriage podcasts. We'd listen to so many Dave and Ashley, so many Naked Marriages, so many Ryan Salinas, so many Fierce Marriages, Jimmy Evans, Jimmy and Irene Rollins. I mean, just so many of these people. That's where we found XO.
Oh, yeah.
I was listening to Fierce Marriage, and Ryan said something, or Selena said something about the Naked Marriage. We started listening to that. Then they're talking about the XO. And like, we read so many books and listened to so many podcasts.
And put things into practice,
yes.
Right? Like, I feel like we really tried.
And we talked about it. And I think that's a huge part. I
don't think we communicated before that.
No, and we would. We may, we read books, we did this, we did that, but it was like I was reading this and she was reading that. We didn't talk about it. We didn't talk about, I may say, oh, listen to this or whatever it is, and you may say whatever, but we didn't like, oh, well, this is great. What do you think? How can we do this? How would this be beneficial to us? What would this look like? Mm-hmm. Whereas then we did, because I think we realized what we had. We realized what God's plan was. And I'm not talking about, oh, you're going to talk to people, you're going to have a podcast, you're going to, no. I meant what God's plan was for us as husband and wife, that we screwed up. We had been doing this wrong for so long. We were a horrible example to our girls.
Right.
Absolutely horrible example to our girls. And when we started to change, like, nobody believed it.
Right.
The people around us. And we had isolated ourselves too. In a way, we had isolated ourselves. When we went through the stuff with our daughter, we really didn't have a lot of people close. It was hard. Mm-hmm. That was part of it. We weren't part of community.
Yeah.
We were just doing things on our own, living our lives, doing things on our own. So that hurt. But then the ones that were near us, which were mostly family and stuff like that, they're like, what are you doing? Like, it's over. Just walk away. Why are you doing this? And when we started really working on it together, I remember when we talked about date night, like the girls, it was one thing. The girls are like, what are you talking about? Nobody does that. Nobody goes on a date every week. Nobody cares. Nobody else's parents do that.
Weird.
That's weird. And it's like, well, they're kids. They didn't understand at the time. They were almost all teenagers.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, one was at Syracuse. Everybody else was still at home. And so they thought we were crazy. Then we're talking to relatives and stuff. And they're like, that's not what take care of your kids. Don't worry about that. Why are you going out? You need to spend time with them and do this and do that. And I think it was then that we realized, listen, we have just done so many things so wrong that us changing and us doing these things, it's not going to be easy. And I think it's going to be harder for those around us than it is for us.
But honestly, I think that everything that you and I went through made us feel like, God is real, not just real, but he's like real.
Yes.
Like, and he will use you. And we feel like we're resilient.
Yes.
That's one of our words, right? Resilient, not because of us, but because of God.
He didn't give up on us.
And we feel, I don't think we'll ever lose that faith of this is how you do it. And this is the way. And it's possible for anyone. So coming at it from our perspective, that's why I think you and I, and we didn't even talk about this till today, really, felt so hurt or just almost offended when we heard this person say that there's really just no coming back from that, because we're like, if that were true, what have we been doing these past few years? What have we been doing? What have we been helping others do? What have we been talking about? What have we, like, how can you ever even give a hint at that? Because here's the other thing. If someone is so lost and so feeling hopeless with their marriage, because you just described utter hopelessness in a desert, right? Like, no, not even a drip of God's power.
Yeah. And
if someone said that to you at that point, you'd be like, okay.
Yeah.
Like you'd believe them.
Absolutely.
And that breaks my heart that someone in that position could be like, wow, it must be hopeless. This person who loves God is telling me that I'm too lost for him to save, that my marriage can't be saved.
And let me, I've got so much on what you just said. And I like that you said someone close to God, because if we go to a marriage counselor, a sacred, or not a sacred, a worldly marriage counselor, your everyday marriage, can pick up the phone book, go online, pick one out, go. And number one, if they don't have faith in God, and if they don't have faith in marriage, almost every time their answer is going to be, oh, okay, well, let's work on how you're going to take care of the kids, how you're going to do those things.
And
let's make this amicable.
And make you happy.
And we talked to so many people, and we went to marriage counseling couple. It was not what we thought, I will say that. But we did go to one guy who was amazing.
Okay.
But, and it also, number one, you go in, they'll ask some questions, you unload all this stuff.
I know what you're going to say.
And then there's like this quick, oh, well, how do you feel? And then it's like, well, you should, but you never hear both sides.
Your hour's over, though.
Your hour's over,
like, how
and you
can
feel
get it
like it's always, oh, well, this one was for him, this one was for her, or maybe
or
sometimes it's a long story, and it's like this one, this one, this one, and maybe that one, or maybe, you know what? Some of them, there's angry women that just don't like men, and some of them are angry men that just don't like. No, I'm just saying.
I know.
So there's all these bends and mess, and you just come out of there, and you're like, I honestly think we were worse than we were when we walked in here.
Because remember when we did go back,
so long ago,
kids were babies, so way back in the day. But I remember leaving there, never feeling like anything was resolved.
No.
I mean, I just felt like we were just gotta, and then you're like, okay, I just like told a lot of stuff that's making the person I'm now leaving with upset.
Yes.
So now we're like even more upset.
Yeah, you're like mad at each other. You're worse off than when you walked in there and everything else. That's just regular marriage counseling.
But I'm sure there are like exceptions to that. I'm sure there are phenomenal marriage
There's an anomaly here or there.
I'm sure there are, but I'm just saying like
it takes years
in our
and
experience
hours and
with it.
So much money and all this other stuff. So I get it. So when you go to a sacred marriage counselor, someone who believes in God, believes in marriage, believes that God has a design for it, everything else, when you go in there, you're hoping to, get
hope.
Yeah, you're hoping that they're not going to tell you, oh, it's too broken.
Like, what's the answer?
Yeah, there's no, oh, it's too broken. Let me qualify as we always do. If there is active abuse, if there is active addiction, if there's an active affair, stop. Get out, get help. It doesn't matter what they say right then. It's not going to change it. You do need some distance. Like, take your safety, take everything.
You're saying that because I feel like in the past you would have been like, no distance.
Yeah.
But now you're realizing like there are these situations where people do need to get out until there is a change of heart.
Yeah.
And there might not be you can control yourself, but not the other person.
Yep. And like, is anything impossible for God?
No.
Absolutely not. But let me tell you what, if there is those things going on and that person's refusing to change, there is nothing you're going to do to change them. You're not going to pray them that way.
Only God will.
And it doesn't mean, I forget about them. But you know what? You can still pray for them. You can pray for them as your spouse, your ex-spouse, your baby daddy, baby, whatever you want to be. But you are not going to force them to change. They have to want to change, and God has to change them. So aside from any of that other stuff,
you said surrender.
Surrender. Aside from any of that other stuff, you're not going to come to me or Kristen and say, and we're going to say, oh man, you're just too broken, because we know where we've been. And I think that's a huge part of it. And I remember, before any of these things ever came to us and all that stuff, I remember when the girls were little and we'd read a book and it was like a parenting book and you look and like, oh, well, this person's like 25 years old. They got a PhD, all this other stuff, and they've never had a kid. How are you telling me to raise my child in theory because you've never gone through it? That's like, okay. And I love people and I love books and everything else. But let me tell you what, if you are young and you've got toddlers, you are not going to tell someone how to raise a middle schooler, high schooler, an adult. You just don't have it yet. It comes in time.
Now, there are studies and theories that you can read and write about, but it's the experience that speaks to other people and the stories that speak to other people. Because I can tell you, I can learn about a topic and not have been there, and I can teach anyone about that topic. However, the heart behind it is what you're going to be missing.
Yeah. And when it comes to marriage, I guess I have a problem more than anything else. There are people that have had a perfect marriage. There are people, and I'm not going to say a perfect marriage. There are people that have a perfect marriage or what looks like an ideal marriage on the outside.
There you go. I
challenge that they've had that on the inside every day. The other side of that, if you have not experienced things, if your marriage has been this, perfect marriage, idyllic, we were both saved, we got together, we had kids, they're wonderful, they're doing wonderful. You're an anomaly. You're a unicorn. You're not everyday life. People go through stuff. Yeah. People are people. We have a sin nature. We screw up. We don't like to say, I screwed up. We don't like to say, I'm sorry. We don't like to ask for help. We don't like to give it to God. So if you have not walked through those things, if you have not been there, and that doesn't mean, I've been, we almost got divorced. I was an alcoholic. I was a drug addict. This one, whatever. And that's not what I'm saying at all. But if you have not walked through those hard times, you're not going to relate personally with the people you're speaking to.
Yeah. In fact, I think
wisdom comes with experience.
Hard for people who haven't walked through it to understand that healing is possible, and that God, and that there is a higher faith than you could imagine because you've seen that miracle. But that's not to say that you can't bless people with your story.
Yes.
To show people this is the way to do it, and these are all the blessings that we have received from it. It's just going to be a different type of ministry.
Yes.
And never lose the faith that God, as much as God has blessed you with a wonderful marriage and a wonderful life, God has that much and more power to redeem others from a horrible marriage and a horrible life, and both are possible with God's.
Yeah, and I think that's really it. The Bible talks a lot about knowledge and wisdom. And if we looked at that in a practical way, people go to college to get a lot of knowledge. And then there's the people who have actually been doing whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Many times when that person comes out of college and has this degree, they have these big ideas and stuff, which is great. But sometimes those big ideas and what we can explain on paper is not the reality of what happens in the real world. Mm-hmm. So you can have an architect designing a building that looks great there, but they didn't go to the site and take a look around, and they don't know what's the substructure is. They don't know all these things. And on paper, it looks really good. Same thing with electrical systems, all this stuff.
Do you know anything about architecture? I'd never heard you talk about it.
A little bit. So anyway... But, there's a lot of things that look really good on paper. And sometimes when we read the Bible or when we read a book, we have the same thing. And I think it's a disservice to ourselves because I don't think we ever get to wisdom without experience.
Yeah, that's good.
And I can tell you a million different things about a million different things, stuff that I've never done in my life, but I've read a lot about it or watched something or whatever. And maybe it'll work, but maybe it won't. Maybe it'll go horribly wrong. But on the same side, in these last number of years, I've read a lot of marriage books. Mm-hmm. I've listened to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of people and stuff like that too. I can tell you what to do, but you're not going to do it because I can tell you what to do. And my answer's not always right. When we share our story of what we've been through, and what God has done in and through us and how he's continuing to do those things, that is the relationship that becomes real and can be the catalyst for someone to say, if God can fix them,
right,
he can fix me or her or us or our family.
Yep.
And I think that's the huge piece that we miss.
Yeah.
We talk to a lot of people. And we hear everything. And I don't know if we talked about this last time. We just tied up a premarital. I don't think we did. I think it was afterwards. We tied up a premarital that we did with a couple last week. And at the end, Kristen said, any feedback, anything we could do better? What do you? And the guy said, he said, just tell your story.
We might have said this. I don't know.
And I'm like, well, what do you mean? And the girl said, we were going in and we met a couple times, but it wasn't until the interview when it was one-on-one with us and not the group that we do that you told your story. And we're like, wow, if they can make it, we can make it.
Yeah.
And it just breaks walls when you tell your story.
That's why God has us do premarital so that they know they can get through it.
Exactly.
These messed up people got through it.
Yeah. And you know what? There's things that you look at on the outside and you think that's impossible.
That's right.
But there are people walking this earth. There are people right around you that are not far off. You have the internet. I guarantee you can find them that have walked through whatever you have walked through. But God turned it for good.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing for me. It's like, don't put God in a box.
Yeah.
Don't judge God's ability. And like you said, if you're still breathing, he's not done with you. He's not done with your marriage. There can be divorce papers.
Yeah.
We've seen it. That's not even us.
No, that's not even us.
But we have
were
seen
too lazy to go.
We have seen God work miracles in couples, in marriages, in families.
Yeah.
Ourselves.
Yeah.
And we see it every day. And I think that's the biggest thing. If we open our eyes, if we calm down, if we be still, if we open our eyes to what's going on around us, if we listen to the people around us, if we listen to where God is leading us, we will see those miracles. And God's still doing them. We just don't see them because there's too much noise and too much stuff and too much negative all around us. He's still good. He's still doing miracles. He still wants what's best for your marriage, for our marriage, for every marriage out there. When you wake up in the morning, look who's in bed with you. That's the one you're supposed to be with. Mm-hmm. It's not a mistake. You didn't fool God. Like, oh, God, you didn't know. No, he knew. He knew. And he still loves you, and he still loves them, and he still wants the best for you.
Now unto him who is able to do exceeding abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that work in us.
Absolutely.
That's good.
Absolutely. So I think that's it. This is our tangent for the day, and it's weird because we weren't sure, and then after that didn't set with me very well when I heard it,
and I already knew that was wrong.
Yeah. And so we talked about it a little bit. But I will say the other side of that, like our conversations are real. We don't go through it before. We don't, we're going to say, no, we don't. It's just the conversation that leads. And I truly urge you to do the same thing in your marriage. Like start talking. It may not be pleasant. It may not be fun to begin with, but the more you do it, the easier it becomes. The more you learn about each other. You will put your foot in your mouth more than once. I still do. But you learn to say, I'm sorry, and read the person and move on.
I want to urge everyone, not just in this, but in everything, if something doesn't set well with you, or if you're like, I've never heard that, or this is great, or whatever it is, just compare it to his word.
Yeah.
I mean, I just gave you 5 different verses why that's wrong.
Yeah.
God can do anything.
Yeah.
And it says it. And the one truth we know is the Bible.
Yeah. And it says God hates divorce. I mean, period. So that's not his plan. It's not his plan for us. Jesus explains it. Go take a look. He hates it. But next week.
Yes, I was just going to say it's Valentine's Day.
It is Valentine's Day and next Friday. So that means we'll have a new episode on Thursday right before Valentine's Day.
And it's going to be a treat. We can't reveal too much.
We're going to have probably
a Valentine's Day treat.
Probably the most romantic guy I've ever met in my life. And I think Kristen will say that too.
Romance,
and we do not agree on romance. So, but this guy and his wife, like their story, and it's
going to be a sweet treat for all.
Absolutely. So, like the podcast, subscribe to the podcast, comment. That would be great. If you have any questions, send them to, if you don't like, what are you talking about? Whatever. We'd love to talk about it. Kevin@marriageandthebuff.com is our email. Post, questions, comments, whatever. And that's about it.
Yes.
We will see you guys next week with our special guest, and it will be Love Week. So we're talking all about love, romance, and just how to do it.
All the hurt things.
Absolutely. All right, guys.
Bye,
have a wonderful week.